I didn't hear the pastor's final blessing. All I heard was the sickening thud of my hand hitting the polished mahogany casket before Brenda's perfectly manicured nails dug into my arm. "You are a disgrace, Sarah. Get out of my father's funeral, or I will call the police right now." The whole chapel in San Diego fell silent. I could feel the 100 eyes, half pitying, half judgmental, his wife, burning holes his through trophy my back. Wife of 5 years. My father was David, physically dragging inside that his box, only child, cold toward the exit doors. And my name is Sarah. And until 6 weeks ago, I thought my life was perfectly normal. I was 26, working retail management in Orange County, and I had a father who adored me. He had retired early from construction, bought a small house near the coast, and spent his weekends fishing or helping me fix up my old beat-up Toyota. She was 10 years younger. He was everything stable blonde, in my universe, and utterly focused on the bottom line. Dad, bless his naive heart, was completely smitten by her flash and her manufactured sophistication. For the first 2 years of their marriage, the strain was just background noise. Brenda always found a reason to cancel our Sunday brunch, or she'd conveniently book a couples retreat during my vacation time. But it was in the last 6 months that I began to notice little things, microscopic shifts that, in hindsight, were screaming alarms. Dad started selling off his old possessions, not the valuable stuff, but the sentimental things, his antique diving watch, his collection of dusty, old-school rock vinyl. When I asked him about it, he'd get defensive, darting glances at Brenda, who would be scrolling on her phone with a tight, satisfied smirk. Avoiding my eyes. Just clearing out the clutter. Brenda likes a clean slate. Then there was the day I found his old leather vest, the one he wore before he met Mom, balled up and stuffed into a trash bag. It was heavy, thick cowhide, worn soft from years of use, smelling faintly of engine oil and road dust. "What are you doing?" I asked Brenda, pulling it out. She didn't even look up from pruning her roses. "That disgusting thing?" David agreed to get rid of it. Life is moved beyond. It's trash, Sarah. That vest belongs to a past. It was history. It was a silent clue pointing back to a period of his life he rarely spoke about, a life Brenda actively tried to erase. The life before the suit jackets and the country club membership she insisted on. The real doubt didn't set in until Dad died. It was fast, a sudden massive heart attack while he was working in the garage. Devastating, yes, but not suspicious. Brenda's lawyer, a weasel named Mr. Sterling, with the reading read the document with a practiced lack of emotion. My father's entire estate, the house, the investments, his 401k, all of it bequeathed solely to Brenda. Me? I got a box of old photos and a used bicycle. It was his final wish, Brenda had whispered to me, dripping full sympathy. He felt you were established enough, darling. Wasn't you Dad. Understand, don't you? He was many things. You wouldn't want to challenge careless with his family. He wasn't cruel. I knew deep down Brenda had manipulated him, isolated him, and I suspected, somehow coerced him into changing the papers shortly before his death. I went to the funeral not to protest the will, but to say goodbye to my dad. I needed that closure, but when I approached the casket for the final viewing, the grief overwhelmed me. I broke down, sobbing, resting my hand on the smooth, messy grief. Certainly not from the daughter who reminded everyone that she was just the second wife. "You're making a scene!" she hissed, her face contorted with fury, utterly exposed for the selfish witch she was. "I said, get out! You are interrupting the proceedings!" She shoved me hard toward the aisle. The shame was suffocating. I stumbled, feeling hot tears scald my cheeks, preparing to flee the place where I should have been standing. I glanced and one last time at the bitterness of the battle I had already lost. That's when the ground started to shake. It wasn't an earthquake, but the deep, guttural rumble of a dozen heavily customized Harley-Davidsons rolling into the quiet, pristine funeral home parking lot. The sound was deafening, a roar that drowned out the pastor mid-sentence, started buzzing, the stained glass turning toward the massive oak doors in elegant black-clad mourners. Who in God's name drives a biker gang to a memorial service? The doors burst open. The figures who filled the doorway were terrifying. They were huge, clad head to toe in leather and denim, their beards long, their faces scarred and weather-beaten. They wore the colors of the Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club, a group so notorious even the police in San Diego tended to look the other Brenda, way, whose every single person inside finally cracked with genuine fear. One man stood out. He was easily 6'6", built like a refrigerator, with a silver skull ring on every finger and an expression that promised violence. He scanned the room, ignoring the pastor and the lawyer, until his eyes landed on me, huddled near the exit, fighting back tears. He started walking toward me, his heavy biker boots crunching loudly on the marble. Robbed or killed right next to my father's coffin. He stopped directly in front of me, forcing me to look up into his cold, dark eyes. "You, Sarah?" His voice was deep, a gravelly whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. He didn't acknowledge the crowd, or the pastor, or the terrified Brenda, who was now clutching her lawyer's arm. He simply reached out terrifying attention toward Brenda. David was my brother from my cheek. We rode together for 20 years. He told me if anything ever happened, and this vulture, he jabbed a massive thumb toward Brenda, tried to pull any crap, I was to handle it. Brenda finally found her voice, high and panicked. "You can't be here. This is a private family matter. Security." The biker, Tank, didn't even flinch. He just pulled a folded, legal-sized document from the inner pocket. It was a document I had never seen before. David had a pre-signed, notarized addition to his will, dated 3 days before his death. He knew exactly what you were, Brenda. He just needed proof you'd show your hand. Tank unfolded the paper, and in a voice that carried the weight of the roaring engines outside, he read the final damning sentence. Should my current wife, Brenda Hale's attempt to exclude my daughter, Sarah Marie Jensen, this document serves as immediate revocation of all my assets, transferring full authority and 90% of my estate to my daughter, Sarah. The remaining 10% is allocated to the Iron Vultures Brotherhood for services rendered in ensuring my wishes are carried out. The silence this time wasn't solemn. It was devastating. Brenda's face went pale. Tank looked down at me, her elaborate facade dissolving into raw, "Your dad wanted you to have peace, kid. Now you go finish saying goodbye." He then looked at his brothers standing guard by the door. "Boys," he rumbled, gesturing toward Brenda and the slimy lawyer, "I think these two need to be escorted to their car, permanently." Watching those huge, intimidating men, the very definition of societal outcasts, most satisfying moment of my life. My father had not forgotten out of the chapel. He had seen the truth, and he had found the perfect, unconventional insurance policy to protect his little girl. Sometimes the people who look the most dangerous are the ones who have the deepest sense of honor. Never judge a book by its cover, especially if that cover is thick leather and covered in motorcycle club patches. If you've ever had an unexpected hero step up to fight a battle you thought you'd, hit that like button and tell me your story. It's a good reminder that family isn't just blood. Sometimes it comes roaring in on 2 wheels. The first thing I realized was that the silence wasn't natural. It was Tuesday, 3 p.m. in Cincinnati, Ohio. Normally, the afternoon rush of traffic on I-71 was a constant low-frequency hum vibrating through the cheap drywall of my apartment building. Like a lack of sound, the air tasted more like a deliberate suppression of it. And the quiet I walked into the kitchen, gripping the chipped ceramic mug so hard my knuckles turned white, the remnants of lukewarm coffee sloshing precariously. My name is Alex Thorne, and 6 months ago, I thought I'd finally stabilized my life after a near-fatal run-in with some very unpleasant people, the kind of people who don't send flowers. They send threats delivered by men built like refrigerators. Fiancé named Sarah. I had new ID. I had built a fortress of normalcy, brick by agonizing brick. I set the mug down, and that's when the second thing hit me. My car keys. I always hang them on the brass hook beside the door. It's OCD, a habit drilled into me by years of moving fast and needing to know where my escape route started. They weren't there. They were lying on the small table beneath the hook. Used. Precisely the one centered on a coaster Welcome to Ohio print. Someone had moved them, not thrown them, not misplaced them in a hurried search, but placed them. It was a deliberate, almost mocking adjustment, a signature left for me alone. My heart hammered a rhythm against my ribs that sounded like a drum solo played too fast. This wasn't a robbery. If it were a simple break-in, the television would be disturbed, gone. Just the cheap jewelry box Sarah kept on the dresser. I forced myself to breathe, counting to 4, holding it, releasing slowly, the tactical breathing trick they teach you when you expect incoming fire. I checked the deadbolt, locked, the windows, latched. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, no easy entry. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking, and brought up the feed from the cheap nanny cam I'd installed facing the front door. Offline, not for a baby, but for my own peace of mind. A power outage? Unlikely. My cheap desk lamp was humming away, and the digital clock on the microwave glowed 3:05 p.m. My camera required a manual reset if the power blinked, but the blinking hadn't happened. Someone had logged in remotely and disabled it, or maybe just unplugged the router, but the Wi-Fi was working fine on my phone. They knew exactly how the system functioned of the living room. More critically, they knew where I hid the cable for the telltale sign of forced entry, nothing on the doors. I knelt by the back window overlooking the alley. The screen was flush, sealed by the small tension lock I'd installed myself. But I noticed something dark and tiny wedged between the sill and the screen frame. I carefully pried it out with the tip of my thumbnail. It was a single long strand of hair. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was evidence. My hair is sandy blonde. They hadn't just been in the apartment. And Sarah's is they had studied my routines. The keys on the coaster, a signature, the offline camera, a warning, the dark hair, a placeholder. They wanted me to know they were here. My mind raced through the list of enemies I thought I'd outrun. Was it the Chicago operation finally finding me? Was it a remnant of the motorcycle club I testified against? Not me. They should be focused on the... Yet here I was, feeling the cold breath of the past on my neck. I moved swiftly into the small walk-in closet, shoving aside hanging clothes until I reached the back wall. Tucked beneath a stack of winter sweaters was the heavy, fire-resistant lockbox containing the only thing that mattered, the binder detailing my witness protection status, and the location of the encrypted drive I used for communication. I fumbled with the combination, the dial clicking loudly in the oppressive quiet, my fingers slick with cold sweat. Click! The latch sprang open. The binder was there. The drive was tucked into its velvet sleeve. Everything physically accounted for. A rush of relief, short-lived, brittle, washed over me. I took the binder out inside and flipped through the thin pages the original detailing the terms of my relocation contract should have just been. Checking the paper one listing the shell company paying my salary was a photograph. It was a picture of me taken 3 weeks ago, sitting alone at the counter of Denny's downtown at 4:30 a.m., drinking black coffee. The quality was pristine, taken from across the street with a long lens. The resolution sharp enough to see the exhaustion etched around my eyes. Picture itself, the real terror, but the handwriting scrawled across the bottom in neat, elegant script. You look tired, Alex. Maybe you should take a break. The handwriting belonged to Sarah Miller, my fiancée, the woman who slept beside me every night, who shared her deepest fears and her silly dreams. The woman who swore she knew nothing about my past, who I trusted with the key to my trying present. To fit this elegant calligraphy of dread into the image of the woman who laughed too loudly at bad movies and insisted on folding my socks into perfect little squares. Was this a sick joke? Was she being blackmailed, or worse, was she the leak? The memory surfaced instantly. Sarah had insisted on helping me file my new, convoluted insurance paperwork combination just to my routines, to my blind the policy spots that protected my assets I kept under my new identity hidden. She had the silence outside the window was still unnerving. It wasn't the silence of absence, it was the silence of anticipation, the coiled quiet right before a snake strikes. I grabbed the encrypted drive and the binder, jamming them into a worn, unassuming backpack I kept hidden under the bed. I couldn't stay. I couldn't confront her. If she was the queen, not yet. Confrontation would be suicide. If she was a pawn, I had to know what game she was playing before I risked everything. I slipped out the back door, taking the fire escape 2 steps at a time, ignoring the searing pain in my recently patched-up knee. The air hit me, cold, sharp, and suddenly smelling less like the familiar city and more like the grave. The person who had moved those keys wasn't a stranger. They were an intimate enemy. Into my bed, and I had invited her into my secrets. I vanished into the density of the alley, heart pounding a desperate rhythm against my ribs. The only thing worse than fighting an unknown enemy is realizing the person holding the knife knows exactly where your scars are. If you've ever had to question whether the person you love is actually the one trying to dismantle your life piece by piece, you know that sickening, stomach-dropping feeling. The most dangerous lies are told by strangers, but whispered sweetly right before you fall asleep. I had to find out why Sarah was doing this, and if I didn't, I knew I wouldn't live to see the sunrise. If you think Alex should confront Sarah directly to get the truth, leave a comment below. But be warned, in my world, confrontation often means pulling the pin on a grenade. The silence in the master bedroom was the heaviest thing I had ever felt. It was the suffocating dead air you find sealed inside a coffin. I lay perfectly still, my eyes tracking the subtle rise and fall of Sarah's chest next to me. She was breathing the slow, deep rhythm of genuine sleep, or maybe the practiced rhythm of a predator waiting for its prey to stop twitching. The sheer audacity of the betrayal had curdled my blood. For 12
Exhausting,
years,
beautiful
we had built
chaos
a life of raising a home in suburban Austin. Now, every single memory felt like a carefully constructed forgery, a stage setting for this final lethal act. How many times had I told her I loved her while she was mentally budgeting for my absence? The question was a physical weight on my lungs. I had to move. I couldn't confront her. The advice was right. That was a death wish. For whatever horrifying plan she had put into motion, I had to find the proof that would let me walk away alive. I waited another 10 minutes, listening to the digital clock tick with agonizing slowness. 1:47 a.m. Slowly, agonizingly, I slid out from under the duvet, moving like a shadow across the thick carpet. The floorboards in our old house often betrayed secrets. Heart hammered against my ribs tonight. A loud, panically muffling the small, scraping sound of my weight shifting, even in her deepest sleep. The target was her home office desk. Sarah was meticulous about filing, but terrible about digital security. She believed privacy was achieved by clicking "Don't save password." I slipped into the office, the coolness of the marble desktop, a stark contrast to the clammy sweat on my palms. I flicked on her laptop, the familiar screen brightness to the absolute. A photo of us laughing on our honeymoon in Maui made me gag. It was the ultimate psychological warfare. I knew her habits. She had a separate browser profile for work, which she always left logged in. I navigated quickly to her financial records. My fingers trembled so badly I nearly mistyped the bank URL. What I expected was evidence of a secret in our joint savings account, maybe a modest travel series of wire transfers that made my vision swim. What I found was gaping. The transfers weren't for vacations or even a down payment on a luxury apartment. They were large, round numbers, 6 figures, sometimes 7, routed through a complex series of shell corporations based in the Cayman Islands. The payee names were always variations on Orion Holdings LLC or Vespa Asset Management. Maybe something far worse. This wasn't petty cheating. This required professionals. This was money laundering. This meant Sarah was knee-deep in something that didn't just threaten our marriage, but my freedom, or worse, my life. But where was the why? Why risk everything, her stable life, her children, for money she couldn't possibly spend openly? I remembered the small, antique wooden box she kept tucked behind her sweaters in the closet, the one she always claimed held old family jewelry. Our anniversary date. It had a small, cheap combination. The closet door creaked slightly as I opened it. I held my breath, listening toward the bedroom, still the slow, steady breathing. The box was where it should be. My fingers were slick with adrenaline as I spun the dial. Click, click, click. The tumbler fell, and the latch sprang open with a loud metallic thunk. Nothing. It sounded like a gunshot in the midnight silence. There was no antique jewelry. There was a stack of crisp $100 bills waiting for Sarah enough to buy a used car. Next to it was a small prepaid burner phone sealed inside a Ziploc bag. But the centerpiece, the item that truly shattered the remaining shards of my reality, was a single folded sheet of parchment. It was a life insurance policy document. My name, Alexander Rourke, was prominently listed as the insured. Enough money to disappear forever and live like royalty. The policy date was just 3 weeks ago, long after I had first noticed the strange mileage on her car. It had been signed, witnessed, and fully activated. My eyes scanned down the fine print, my breath catching in my throat. Under conditions and exclusions, a specific rider had been attached. It waived the standard waiting period for payouts arising from in the event of accidental overdose of prescribed accidental overdose. My stomach twisted violently. I had been having trouble sleeping lately, and Sarah, my loving, concerned wife, had insisted on bringing me a glass of warm milk every night before bed, insisting it helped settle the nerves. I hadn't slept well since she started that routine. I looked at the burner phone. The screen was dark of the device, but a small white piece of paper, sharp and concise, clearly not Sarah's elegant handwriting. Protocol initiated. Tonight, ensure full compliance. We need the assets liquid by sunrise. They weren't just planning to steal money. They were planning to steal me. Tonight was the deadline. The milk I drank an hour ago, was that the highly professional, organized hit job? My window of opportunity, undeniable clarity, flooded the moment I drank that milk. I wasn't confronting a strange spouse. I quickly tucked the evidence, the policy, the note, and the burner phone into my pocket. I had to get out now. I turned to slip back toward the bedroom to retrieve my wallet and keys, the necessary tools for survival. But as I reached the doorframe, I stopped. The breathing from the bed. Rourke was no longer in the bed. The air conditioning was pulled back, the only sound now filling the space, yet perfectly smooth, Sarah, as if she had never been there at all. I heard the faint, metallic snick of a lock turning downstairs. The front door. She wasn't asleep. She was already moving. I was trapped on the second floor, and the clock was ticking down on my life. I knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever was coming through that front door wasn't if I wanted to survive the night, and it wasn't coming to way out of this house, right now. There was no time to wait for the authorities, no time for proof, only time for running. The only question now was, window or fire escape? And would the milk paralyze me before I reached the ground? The paralysis hit, not like a wave, but like frozen gravel pouring into my veins. Felt enormous, my fingers useless, curled around the dusty sill of the second-floor window. It was screaming in my ears. Window or fire escape? The decision was brutally simple when the front door downstairs exploded inward with a sound that shook the old Boston brownstone to its foundation. Not a kick, but a battering ram, or something heavy and professionally applied. Whoever was coming didn't care about stealth or negotiation. They cared about speed and the finality. Slow descent of the I didn't have the strength for. I swung my right leg over the window frame, the thin pane of glass scraping against my thigh. My muscles screamed in protest, not from exertion, but from the sudden chemical revolt happening inside them. I was trying to move a body that no longer answered to my brain. It was like trying to run underwater wearing concrete boots. Below me, the drop was perhaps 12 feet onto an unforgiving patch of overgrown azaleas and hard He's upstairs. Check the back. That confirmed it. Not Sarah, not the police. This was collection as promised. With a desperate, gasping heave, I shoved myself off the sill. For a terrifying second, I was airborne, a falling mannequin. The ground rushed up. I tried to brace myself, but the paralyzing agent ensured a messy, uncontrolled impact. I hit the dirt hard, pain twisting my ankle sharply, temporarily overriding the chemical numbness. White hot. That pain, ironically, was my salvation. It was a sensory shock that snapped a tiny connection back online. I landed half hidden among the bushes, tasting soil and fear. Upstairs, the heavy sound of a door being kicked open echoed directly above my head. They were in the bedroom. They had missed me by seconds. Using my elbows and the sheer white-knuckled force across the narrow, fenced-in yard, I began to drag myself away. My left leg was dragging, completely useless, but the right one, fueled by the fresh injury, still offered some purchase. Every inch was a monumental victory against the growing inertia of the toxin. I heard the window rattle above me. A shadow moved. He went out the back window. The voice was colder, less patient. Marcus. I recognized the low, menacing timbre now from a suppressed memory. The fixer, the one who handled the messes. Phone I reached the low wooden fence that separated Sarah's property from Mrs. Henderson's impeccably manicured lawn. I didn't climb. I rolled, snagging my shirt on a splintered rail, ripping the fabric but gaining precious yards. The air was cool, the scent of fresh-cut grass overpowering the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. Looking like a broken puppet, crawling across a well-lit suburban lawn in the middle of the night, 4 blocks away on a quiet side street just in case. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot. The numbness began to creep into my lungs, making my breathing shallow and ragged. I knew I had maybe 5 minutes of functional movement before I became totally immobilized. I pushed forward, ignoring the throbbing pain in my ankle, leveraging myself against the curb until I could drag my body. The streets were empty, silent witnesses to my grotesque escape. I finally reached the car. Fumbling with the keys was an agonizing process. My fingers felt like sausages, unresponsive to fine motor control. It took 3 attempts to jam the key into the lock. Inside the car, I collapsed onto the driver's seat, gripping the wheel. I looked back towards the direction of Sarah's with terrifying clarity, no lights, the true extent of Sarah's betrayal, just the darkness and her possible hiding last act of love. I realized if she had truly wanted me dead, the milk would have been a lethal dose, instant and irreversible. The small, localized paralysis meant she had dosed it just enough to slow me down, to keep me from interfering, but perhaps not enough to kill me outright. She gave me a window, a literal window, escape, and a small-time buffer. And I was the distraction. She had set the stage for her disappearance. I started the engine, the ultimate, the familiar rumble, a comforting, solid sound in the chaos. I didn't head for the police. I couldn't. Not when I knew the scope of Marcus's operation could reach into any corner of the city. I drove west, out of Boston, into the anonymity of the highway, my injured ankle pressing the gas pedal, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and slowly purging. I spent the next 2 months bouncing between cheap motels, I sold recovering the car from Pittsburgh, flew to Denver, and started over with a new identity cobbled together from cash and fear. I never saw Sarah again. What she was involved in, the scope of the theft, the reason for the frantic need to disappear, remained a dark, frustrating mystery. But the lesson, the cold, hard truth of your life paid into my memory when they started switching the brands of food you buy, trust the most, or changing small, innocuous routines. It's not domestic bliss. It's groundwork. We spend our lives building foundations of trust, believing that the people we let into our homes and our beds are transparent, but sometimes they are the best actors running a parallel existence right under our noses. Sarah wasn't just my fiancée until the milk was already in the making, and I was every glass of milk I drink, every quiet evening, every locked door feels like a test. The paranoia is permanent, a scar deeper than the one on my ankle. I survived that night not because I was smart, but because I was lucky, and because someone, in a twisted, terrible way, decided to slow the poison just enough. Doesn't fit. If you are listening to this and you have that friend who vanished or reappeared with a story that feels too clean, don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it away because it's easier to live in the comfortable lie. Look closer at the people you hold dear. Dig into the background noise. Tell me, what tiny, strange detail have you noticed recently that you've been too afraid to investigate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because often the things we dismiss as minor coincidences are actually the first quiet warnings that the game is about to begin. And trust me, you don't want to be caught on the second floor when the clock runs out.